So we're coming to the end of our series in the book of Galatians, and if you have a Bible with you, I'd ask you to turn with me to Galatians 5, where we'll be in just a moment. If you don't have a Bible with you, then maybe you could grab one from the seat back in front of you, or if you're on a front seat, maybe you could ask for one from behind you if you don't have any seats in front of you. If you're in the East Worship Center, then there may be some available there in and around the tables that you could grab hold of. But I'd encourage you to find your place in Galatians chapter 5. Now, the book of Galatians, just in a quick recap, Paul is making an argument. And he's making an argument against some people who came into Galatia after he planted the church, and he told them there is but one gospel, one true gospel, and that is faith in Jesus plus nothing minus nothing. After Paul leaves, he's got some people that come in from Jerusalem who basically say, you know what, Paul did not give you the full meal deal, that there is more to understand about the gospel, and here's what you need to understand. You need to understand that you can have faith in Jesus, but you also better keep all of the aspects of the law. Most notably, they were talking about the Sabbath law, the dietary laws about eating with non-Jews, and very specifically to the book of Galatians, they were talking about the covenant sign being circumcision. So, because the Galatians were people who were not Jewish predominantly, that now these Jews who said you could have faith in Christ were coming into Galatia and saying, if you really want to be the people of God, then as adults, you need to take the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision, and you need to obey all of the externals related to the law if you really want to understand what the people of God are. Paul says, absolutely not. That is not the case. That just is going to enslave you. That's going to bring you to a place where you're going to be captive. And instead, I want you to be people who live free. And what it means to live free is not that you're going to be people of the law, but you're going to be people of the Spirit. And so what Paul does is he lays before them two different tracks, and then he talks about the reality of what those tracks produces. He says, this way, if you go the way of obedience to the law, so to speak, if you're going to try and fulfill all the obligations of the law and not really just depend upon faith in Jesus Christ, who is in fact the fulfillment of the law, but if you're just going to go the way of the law, you're kind of negating the power of the cross, and it's going to lead to emptiness, it's going to lead to being enslaved, and it's not going to curb the desires of the flesh in any way. I want you to walk by the power of the Spirit of the living God. So he says, and he gives them some indication that there are kind of two pathways. Look in verse 13. He says, you, my brothers, you were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Now, I know on the screens it says sinful nature. That's a proper translation as well. I like the term flesh better because it corresponds to his argument through the course of the text about circumcision. Paul's using that term very specifically. He says, don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. And then in verse 26 of that same passage, he says, let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. Paul is commenting here on actually the state of affairs in Galatia. He knew that those agitators that came in and talked about the way of the flesh had brought in with them this dissension and this faction related to the gospel, and he knew that the product of that life was going to be in slavery again to the activity of the law, and it would not curb the desires of the flesh, and it would not be the actual token of God's Spirit, so to speak, being broadcast in the world. So we have to remember that why Paul's arguing this way is because the very things that the agitators were coming in and saying you needed to do, in saying that you needed to obey the law, they were actually defying the one kind of primary and big picture schema of the law itself, which was love. That was lacking in this context, and so Paul wanted to make sure that he pointed that out. If you go this direction and this is the way that you want to live, you're not going to have the power that you need to be able to love people. Now, look in verse number 16. This is a key verse for us. Paul says, so I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify or fulfill the lusts or desires of the flesh. Live by the Spirit, and you won't gratify the desires of the flesh. Now, what Paul's doing, he's already given us a picture that there's two ways. You can walk by the flesh, and you can walk by the Spirit. But let's pause here for just a second and ask a few questions. Paul has already been alluding to this life in the Spirit all through the course of his writing in the book of Galatia. Now, in chapter 1 and chapter 2, he was setting that idea up by some of the things that he was talking about, but then he starts unpacking, beginning in chapter 3, he keeps referring to the Spirit of God. He keeps on, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6. I've condensed them all. Instead of going one by one, I've condensed them all. Notice what he says, and I'm going from chapter 3 all the way to chapter 6 here. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by observing the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning with the Spirit, are you now trying to attain your goal by human effort? Then chapter 3, verse 5, does God give you his Spirit and work miracles among you because you observe the law or because you believe what you heard? And then it says in verse 14, he redeemed us in order that the blessing given to Abraham might come to the Gentiles through Christ Jesus, so that by faith we might receive the promise of the Spirit. In chapter 4, verse 6, because you were sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. And then it says at that time, the son born in the ordinary way persecuted the son born by the power of the Spirit, and it is the same now. Chapter 6, verse 1, brothers, if someone's caught in a sin, you who are spiritual or who walk by the Spirit should restore him gently, but watch yourself or you also may be tempted. And then verse 8 of chapter 6, the one who sows to please his flesh, from that flesh will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. So, Paul's trying to communicate loud and clear that he's getting at this idea that he's summing up for us in verse number 16. So I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. Now, here's what we should do. We need to pause here because this is a big idea to Paul. This is a big idea for us. This is what he was trying to communicate to the people in Galatia, and it's what the Spirit of God is communicating to us, and it's this. Walk filled with the Spirit. Live in the Spirit. Now, who are we talking about when we talk about the Spirit? That's a fair question, isn't it? Because that is a hard thing for us to get our arms around. It's kind of like grabbing Jell-O, right? We just don't know what to do with that. God the Father, we kind of have maybe a picture because we just say, God, right? And then we've got Jesus, and we can really get our arms around that, flesh and blood. But when we talk about the Spirit, oftentimes we kind of parse the Spirit out. It's like we've got God the Father and we've got Jesus, but then we've got this Spirit, and we don't really know what to do with that. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, let me pause you and help you to understand that God is Trinity. By that, we simply mean that 3 in 1, not 3 gods, 1 God, but with 3 distinct identities. God as Father, God as Son, and God as Spirit. Now, when we say that, what we can do, unfortunately, is that we can so parse those things out that we lose connectivity there, and we should never do that. Because we talk about God as Father and God as Son, Jesus, and then we talk about the Spirit, and sometimes we've got him way over here. Right? We don't know what to do with him. And when I say him, I'm not referring to an it. I'm referring to a personhood, because you can grieve the Spirit, right? When you sin against God, you're not breaking a law. You're breaking a heart. You see, this is a personhood. This isn't just some arbitrary thing. When I speed and I break a law, okay, that's kind of an arbitrary, intangible thing for me. But when we sin against God, it's not about just breaking a law. It's about breaking a heart. We're grieving God by his Spirit. Now, given that the Spirit of God is one personhood in the Trinitarian nature of God, what we can't do is we can't divorce him, so to speak, from the nature of who God is. Because the Spirit is God. God is one. You go, I don't really get this whole God is one with 3 distinct identities thing. Welcome to the party. There's really no one who fully gets that. This is one of the mysteries of the nature of God. It's like trying to parse out. Let me explain God to you. Hopefully no one's ever even started a sentence that way with you. Let me explain God to you. You just run. That's what I would do. I would run as fast as you could. Because nobody's ever going to fully be able to explain God in his essence to you. He is God, you are not. We have those 2 things figured out for sure, right? So what do we do with this idea of the Spirit? Well, let's do this. Let's just make sure we listen to Jesus, and let's listen to Paul, and maybe we can put our arms around this a little bit more, because when Paul's saying, he's giving us a command, live by the Spirit. This is what he's trying to get at. This is the heart of what Paul's trying to say to the Galatian church. And it's at the heart of what I believe the Spirit is trying to say to us. Live by the Spirit. So what did Jesus say in reference to the Spirit? Let me give you just a couple of places, beginning in John 14. I'll go John 14, John 15, John 16. Jesus said these words, "If you love me, you'll obey what I command. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you." And then listen to this. This is Jesus talking. "I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you." Then in chapter 15, Jesus says, "When the counselor comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who goes out from the Father, he will testify about me. And you also must testify, for you've been with me from the beginning." And then chapter 16, Jesus said, "I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear, but when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth. He will not speak on his own. He will speak only what he hears, and he will tell you what is yet to come. He will bring glory to me by taking from what is mine and making it known to you. All that belongs to the Father is mine. That is why I said the Spirit will take from what is mine and make it known to you." Now, you start to read this and you go, man, it sounds, there's a distinction because Jesus is talking about, I'm going to, when I leave you, I'm going to send you the Spirit. But Jesus at the same time, in the same breath says, I'm going to send you the Spirit, and I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I'm going to be with you. It's the same thing he was saying in Matthew chapter 28, right? The very end, right before his ascension. He's saying, Jesus came to them and said, "All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." You know what he was doing? He was getting ready to check out. And he's telling them, I'm going to be with you forever, world without end. How so? The Spirit. That's how. That's why Paul had the real comfort in addressing, when he would address the nature of the Spirit, oftentimes he would use a form of address of the Spirit that maybe helped us to understand the activity of the Spirit a little bit better. Now, Luke writes an account in the book of Acts, but he's explaining what Paul and his team did in Acts chapter 16. It says, when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the who? Spirit of who? The Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. Listen to how Paul refers to the Spirit in Romans 8, verse 9. You, however, are controlled not by the flesh, but by the Spirit, if the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he does not belong to Christ. And then listen to how he begins Philippians chapter 1. For I know that through your prayers and the help given by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. Now, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because you're going, okay, Jerry, if what you're talking about here, live by the Spirit, what exactly is Paul trying to say to us? Listen, here's what I think he's trying to say to us. Let me see if I could say it in a way that maybe makes a little more sense. Live like Jesus by the power of God. Live like Jesus by the power of God. Why do I say that? I say that because the role of the Spirit is to brag on Jesus. That's what he does. He makes much of Jesus. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, when you hear things that are attributed to the Spirit, as I've seen sometimes on television or heard on the radio or whatever, and you hear things that are attributed to this move of the Spirit, listen, if it looks nothing like Jesus, I can assure you it has nothing to do with him. For instance, this was years and years ago, but they talked about this great move of the Spirit where people who were so impacted by the Spirit rolled around on the floor barking like dogs. Now, you go, Jerry, I'd be careful to speak against the Spirit. Listen, I'm very careful I don't want to ever speak against the Spirit. But I know what the Spirit does. The Spirit magnifies the Son of God. And I don't know that you would find the Son of God rolling around barking like a dog saying, this is to the glory of God. Right? Hey, the Spirit's probably going, don't blame me for this. When you see people who are talking about the demonstration of the power of the Spirit, but really what it is at its core is self-exaltation, it has nothing to do with the Spirit. Nothing. Because the Spirit will be making much of Jesus. He will be magnifying Jesus. So be careful. This actually gives you a better lens to look through. Because when Paul says, live by the Spirit, he's not saying anything goes and you can just blame it on the Spirit. He's saying, live like Jesus by the power of God. This is what it means to live in the Spirit. Maybe I needed to pause there because this is such a foundational thing that Paul's saying to us in this passage that we need to grab hold of it, because this is the big idea of what he's trying to say. He's basically trying to say, if you're going to live by the aspects of the law and try and manufacture the life of God, it will end in captivity and you won't live free. You won't understand what the kingdom of God tastes like. That's why I'm saying to you, live the life of Jesus by the power of God. Live in the Spirit. This is where freedom comes from. This is where freedom is found. Living life in the contour and in the context of the Spirit. So he says, live by the Spirit and you will not gratify the lusts of the flesh. Now let me pause for a second. Let's unpack flesh for a minute. It has many meanings when we read about it in the Scripture. First of all, when we use the term flesh, it could be referring to our physical body. That is not what's being referred to here in Galatians, but that could be one meaning. Sometimes we read the Scripture and we see flesh used, and it's referring to our physical body, and you have to understand the context to know how it's being used. Other times the word flesh is used. It's talking about all of the people who have yet to put their faith in Jesus Christ. And at other times, like specifically here in Galatians, flesh is used to describe after someone has come to faith in Christ, they have been changed, they put their faith in Jesus, they've heard the gospel, they have now been baptized by the Spirit into the family of God, and they are a new creation inside, living in a not yet fully newly created human fallen body. And because of that human fallenness that we still have, that remnant of who we were, it calls out and it lusts out for all the wrong things. But it is still remaining there. So in other words, we've got, as believers in Jesus, we have inside of us, we have new creation. We have a regenerated soul living in an unregenerate flesh. You say, well, Jerry, that may be you. But my flesh is regenerated. If that were the case, then you just don't mind Jesus when he calls us for this great resurrection, where he's going to transform who we are in full. Don't mind him. Just carry on. If your flesh has been fully redeemed, if your flesh has been fully made new, if the mortal has become immortal, if the perishable has become imperishable, then feel free to do what Jesus did and go ahead and walk through walls and show up to your next party. Because he did that in John chapter 20. All the disciples were hanging out together and he just walked in. He didn't knock. What's up? What? Remember the honeycomb hideout guy? He used to do that. He used to like blow through walls, Except, his was all messy. Jesus kind of walks in. He's got a glorified body. And there is coming a time, we live in this already not yet tension, right? We've got this thing, sin, working in our members, but we've been made new so that what we want and what we desire is consistent with the heart of God, right? The Spirit of God lives in us. But sometimes it wars against us in the members of our flesh, so to speak, and there's a raging battle. So Paul makes that clear to us. And then he says this in verses 17 and 18. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other. Anybody ever lived that before? Anybody ever had that happen to them? Ever been in conflict? The Spirit and the flesh ever been in conflict in your life? If not, Verse 18, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under law. I want you to notice something here interesting. I find people saying to me oftentimes, Jerry, I'm just at war against the flesh. I'm just at war against the flesh. Okay, cool. I get that. And remember, we're not talking about our physical, about where we're just, I'm gonna get that thing. Stop it. It's not that, right? It's not what we're talking about. Like beating ourselves up, right? When they say that they're at war against the flesh, that's good. I get it. But understand what the scripture says, that it is the Spirit who opposes the flesh. And it is the flesh that opposes the Spirit. So that means that where the flesh is coming from, it's coming from a place of fallenness. It's coming from a place of evil because the Spirit is in opposition to it. And the flesh is in opposition to the Spirit because it's motivated by evil. It's motivated by the antithesis of the kingdom of God. So we have to keep that in mind, but we do have to cooperate with the Spirit of God, right? If we want to understand what it means to live life in the Spirit, we do have to cooperate with the Spirit of God. It's not just one of those things where you just go, look, all you got to do is just comes naturally, whatever comes naturally. Listen close. I've been around some of those it comes naturally people. And I'm just saying that what they're talking about is nonsense. And the reason I'm saying that is because nothing in life shows us that that's the case. Did you just learn to play the piano naturally? You just learned German naturally. I just let German come to me, right? Whatever. I mean, no, you didn't. You know what you did? You practiced. And you practiced in cooperation with the reality of what it meant to speak German. You practiced in cooperation with the reality of what it meant to play the piano. You practiced in cooperation with what it meant to have good voice techniques so that you could actually sing. But you know why you did that? You did that so that there would be a point where it was natural. So we do have to cooperate with the Spirit. It is the Spirit's grace. It is the Spirit's motivation. It is the Spirit's power. But we are saying yes to the Spirit, and we are cooperating with Him in the process of shaping who we are into the image of Jesus. So Paul makes that clear to us. And then he says, I also want to remind you of what it looks like to walk in the flesh. And he says in verse number 19, the acts or the works of the flesh are obvious. Sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. So you know what he tells us? He says, look, if you want to walk by the flesh, it's gonna corrupt every part and parcel of your life. Religiously, relationally, socially, it's gonna corrupt all of that. So he says, they're obvious, the acts or the works of the sinful nature. Now, I wanna remind you of a couple things here. When you come to this list, first of all, understand this. This isn't an exhaustive list. Paul could have listed double that, triple that, 5 times that, right? It's not an exhaustive list, it's representative. These are representative things of the works of the flesh. Do you know why I say that? Because Paul himself says that. He goes on this and this and this and this, and then he says, and the like, right? Paul himself tells us, I could tell you more, because here's the danger. It's an irony, actually, that Paul is arguing against agitators who are coming to people saying, you've got to follow all of the lists of the law. And then he makes a list. He makes a list of the acts of the flesh. It's really somewhat ironic that Paul does this. I think it's brilliant. Paul's smart. Just, dude, smart. Gray matter up in his skull. So he makes this list, but here's our danger. Listen, it's not an exhaustive list, it's representative. But here's our danger. It's also a flesh trap for us when we read this. You say, well, how could it be? No, it was perfect when it was written. It was inspired of the Spirit of God. It's completely and totally true. But here's what we'll do with our flesh. We will take this list as some kind of exhaustive list, and some of you, when you were hearing everything I was calling out, were going, that thing that I do all the time wasn't on there. Fantastic. And so you think somehow that you just take this list And if you can sin manage your way out of this list, you're in business. But unfortunately, you still got your Bibles open? You better. Because what you'll do when you do that, here's what you do. You reverse verse number 16, you invert it, and then it becomes untrue. See what verse 16 says, it says, live by the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. But see, here's what somebody who is misunderstanding what Paul's trying to do, here's what they'll do, and this is the flesh trap. What you'll do is you'll say, okay, well, he's listed some stuff that if I do that, then that's part of the flesh. So, if I don't gratify the desires of the flesh, then I'm walking by the Spirit. No, you're not. If you walk by the Spirit, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. But just because you have not gratified the desires of the flesh doesn't mean that you're walking by the Spirit. Example, I know you're asking. I have chosen not to kill any of my neighbors. It's a thing that I do everywhere I move. I always choose not to kill them. We here at the chapel are against that. Obviously, I'm using hyperbole here, right? Not choosing to kill your neighbors is not the same thing as loving them. You can sin manage and figure out, you know what, I know I'm not supposed to kill. And that's usually the lame thing I always get from people when I'm talking to them about faith. Man, tell me about what your life looks like in relationship to God. I never killed anybody. Okay, great. Let's move on from that. Good to hear, that you haven't killed anybody. I'm for that. We're for that. But you hate your neighbor's guts. I hadn't killed him. I want to, but I haven't killed him. Right? So there's a very different thing that's going on here, a very different dynamic. Just because you can sin manage doesn't mean all of a sudden that you are walking filled with the Spirit. Paul says, I want you to live by the Spirit. These things are fighting one another. And he says the acts of the flesh are clear. Now, we all know that this is true, don't we? Because the reality is Paul talks about it in another place in Colossians chapter 2 when he talks about trying to manage our sin. Listen to what he says in Colossians 2. Don't let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. And pause right there for just a second. You can leave it up, but you hear what he's saying? He's saying, you know what? Everybody's all on you about, hey, I can't believe that you're walking 4 miles on the Sabbath day. I can't believe that you're not observing this particular festival, and Paul's just trying to go, hey, look, gang, all of these things are a shadow that we're pointing to the reality, which is Jesus. If we keep holding on to the shadows, we're living in virtual reality, not in reality. Jesus is reality. And when we embrace him, we don't have to go around doing all of these things and trying to manage all of this stuff. That's why Paul says, since you died with Christ to the basic principles of this world, why, as though you still belong to it, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These are all destined to perish with use because they are based on human commands and teachings. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed worship and their false humility and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. I was a college student, and I really came to a place of faith in Jesus Christ. It was incredible. It was like, I'm just sold out, man, for Jesus. Whatever he wants me to do, I love him. I don't want to be who I was. I only want to be who I am now in him. I mean, it's just an incredible, freeing, liberating place to be, right? And so I start leading this Bible study in my apartment as a college student, and we started off with 7. I mean, I'm a new believer. I didn't even know what I was talking about. We started off with 7. I grew it to 5. It was a fantastic ministry that I was involved in, right? And here's the thing, I've just got a bunch of dudes, right? And many of them are just new to faith, and some of them are wild, and maybe some of them weren't as wild or whatever. And we start reading through the Bible, and some of it's like first pass for me because I wasn't paying attention much growing up. And so now I'm reading it sometimes for the first time, and I'm like, okay, yeah, Jesus said, don't lust. Yeah, That's a big one. You got a bunch of 19, 20-year-old dudes who are just new to faith, and they're just, okay, don't lust. And I was like, okay, I got you. So you know what I did? I just walked around campus like this. Just walking with my head down, my backpack. Hey, Jerry, what's up? I don't know what's going on. And then I would hear voices over here, and it sounded like girls. Oh. And so you know what would happen? So I'd be walking, I'd be like, I can't look up. Jesus said, don't lust. I can't even look up. I hear him talking, I'm leaving. And then what I'm doing is I'm leaving, I'm picturing what they look like. You know what I'm talking about? Do you know what? This is what's true to life in the scripture. He says, look, you're trying to impose all of these things on you, and they do nothing to restrain the flesh. Nothing at all. Just because you can sin manage doesn't mean you're walking by the Spirit. Only the Spirit of God can give you the strength to walk around with your head up and love people. To demonstrate the life of Jesus through you by the power of God. I just walked around campus and just had a bunch of knots on my head. What did that do? What are the knots on your head for, Jerry? Because I'm not looking up at anybody. Way to go. It's going to go great in a job interview. Tell me about yourself. It does not restrain sensual indulgence. So, churches do the same thing while I'm thinking about it. Churches do the same thing. Because when you become kind of legalistically minded and you start looking at this list that he laid out here about the obvious acts of the flesh, and churches, I still have yet to run into any pastor who's like okay to church-wide orgy. Paul talks about it. He talks about this being an activity of the flesh. I haven't run into anybody who's gone, yeah, that's a good move. But apparently, it's okay to have dissensions and factions and divisiveness and envy and gossip. All those apparently are okay in the church. Paul's saying, look, you are going to instantaneously be hypocritical if you try and make this a rule list by which you are trying to sin manage. You'll never be able to accomplish it. It's clear, it's already true to life that nobody can accomplish that. That's not what I'm talking about. He's just saying it's obvious when people don't walk full of the Spirit. It manifests itself in a number of different ways, and he says, if that's the case, you won't see the kingdom of God. If you habitually live like this, you're not going to see the kingdom of God because you're too busy blocking everybody's view. But then he says, what does it look like to live in the Spirit? Well, he says in verse number 22 and 23 these words, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things, there is no law. Now, some of you are probably thinking to yourself, well, Jerry, what I would expect now in this message is what I've expected in every message that I've ever heard about the fruit of the Spirit, that you're going to take them one by one and you're going to explain to me what they are. Wrong. Number one, some of you were thinking that in your head and then looking at your watch going, I know he's running out of time, so I don't think he's going to do that. I know you people. All right, so what am I going to do with that? Listen, Paul just gave us an illustration where he talked about what the acts or the works of the flesh look like. And then he says, here's what the fruit of the Spirit looks like. Now, it's an interesting contrast that he makes here. Listen close. He talks about works of the flesh, fruit of the Spirit. Works, plural, fruit, singular. Why do I tell you that? There's probably a number of interesting designations and insights that we could get into that with, but let me just pause for one of the many. The one would be this, that when Paul's talking about the works of the flesh, here's what he's reminding us of. That there could be any point at any time where you're engaging in 2 or 3 of these things and maybe not engaging in 2 or 3 others, right? Well, you're pretty bad on the gossip side, and you're doing all, but you're not involved in sexual immorality at the time. That kind of stuff. So you could be doing a few of these things at the same time and not doing a few of these things at the same time. But then he transitions and he says, but let me tell you about the fruit of the Spirit. And some of you look at this, again, in the wrong mindset, and you look at it and you say, okay, the fruit of the Spirit, here's what I got to do. I got to work on patience. I'm doing pretty good with love, I think, but man, I don't have any patience whatsoever. I think I'm faithful, but I'm not gentle. I gotta bring gentle up in the bound. This is not what Paul is talking about. What he's saying is this, because this list that he gives us, it is also not exhaustive. It's representative. I mean, we could add a number of things to this that Paul would echo and go, amen. Holiness. These types of things. We could add a bunch of things to this, right? Compassionate. Merciful. So we could just keep the list going. What is Paul trying to say? He's trying to say this, listen. When life in the Spirit demonstrates itself in such a way that the life of Jesus is living out through us, therefore, the fruit of the Spirit is singular. It's not about you're doing one or two. It's that when you are walking full of the Spirit, all of these things are true of you because they are true of Jesus. What? Yeah, think about it. Every one of these that you read, look at them again. You see, it's Jesus' love. It's Jesus' joy. It's His peace. It's His patience. It's His kindness, His goodness, His faithfulness, His gentleness, His self-control. It is His life living out through you. It's not about you trying to manufacture the life of Jesus. It is about you cooperating with the Spirit so that the real life of Jesus would be manifest through you. I know this is hard to grab hold of, but it is the core of what Paul is talking about here. And here's what he says. When you live like this, there is no law against that. Remember, he's talking to the Galatians and he's trying to say to them, the way of the law is the way of enslaving. You're trying to manufacture your way into the life of God. I'm saying live by the Spirit, because when you live by the Spirit, there is no law against that. In fact, here's what happens. When you live by the Spirit, you are manifesting the very life of Jesus. And when you do that, the law is over here standing to the side, applauding, saying, that's what I was talking about. This is not just about me, the law. This is about this. This is what I was pointing to. And the law just applauds and says, this is what it was for, to point you to Jesus, that your faith in Him would have you baptized into the family of God by the power of the Spirit, so that you could walk like Jesus walks by the power of God as you deeply trust Him with all that you are. Then he finally says in Verse 24, these words, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Some of you are going, hey man, I don't know, because I struggle plenty with the flesh. I don't think it's been crucified, if you know what I mean. In fact, I think it's alive and well. I think it like celebrates birthdays, right? Now pause. When Paul uses the term crucifixion, understand what he's talking about. Crucifixion, a Roman institution that was a very long and drawn out and painful way to die. The Romans did that intentionally, because, right, I mean, if you want to kill somebody, cut their head off, right? That's a way that they would do it in times past. Just cut their head off. And in fact, if you're like giving me options, crucifixion or get your head cut off, cut my head off. Because, I mean, it's like, done, goodbye. Crucifixion, you get up there, here's the problem. You're as good as dead when you get up there because you're never coming down. But it may take a while. Days. It may take a while. Paul's saying this. With what happened through Jesus' power at the cross and His resurrection, and then your faith in the gospel of His death and resurrection. Listen, here's what happened. Your flesh, it's as good as dead. But it's going to be a long, kind of drawn out deal. Let me explain it to you in a parable. Some of you like stories, so it's like story time with Jerry. All right, let me explain it to you in a parable. I'm borrowing this from someone that I don't remember, at least his image, and I'm extrapolating on it. It's just the pains of reading a lot. Sometimes you forget where you read something. But I didn't make it up, so that's the main point I want to make. Let's picture your flesh like a dragon that lives in the cave of your soul. One day, you hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. That he says, I'll make you my possession. I will transform you. I will slay the dragon. To which you respond by saying, I can't do that because I am the dragon. The dragon's a part of me. If you slay the dragon, I'll die. To which Jesus says, yes, you will, but I will raise you up. I will transform you. I will make you new. I will make you different. So in the glory of the person of who Jesus is, and in the beauty and the majesty of what you understand about the gospel, and in seeing him, you fall to your face in loyalty and allegiance and say, Jesus, everything I am for you. I put my faith and trust in you. You get up from your face, and as you rise, Jesus looks to you and he puts a sword in your hand, and he says, follow me. And you follow him to the mouth of a cave. And then Jesus looks at you at the mouth of the cave where the dragon lies and says, go in and slay the dragon. And you say, hang on, I can't. I cannot do that by myself. Jesus smiles approvingly and says, you're quick study. You're right. But remember this. No command I ever give you is ever for you to do it alone. And upon saying that, he leaves. You stand at the mouth of the cave holding the sword, and he's not there. And so somewhat fearfully and frightfully, you walk into the cave, and the dragon rears his head. And you get ready to unload, and as you do, you feel a hand on yours. And you slay the dragon. And upon slaying the dragon's laying there. You now don't see Jesus, but you hear him. And he says, the dragon is slain, but he hasn't bled out yet. Treat him as if he is dead. And walk out to the front of the cave and put all of the rocks in front of it as a burial ground for this dragon. Because even though he's not dead, he is going to occasionally violently convulse and yell and scream and keep all kinds of havoc rolling. But you put all the rocks in front of that cave and you seal it up like it's a graveyard. And when the Lord of darkness sends an earthquake into your soul to shake those rocks free, you take them and you build it back up and you say, no, that dragon is going to be dead, because Jesus whispers to you, though you don't see him, he reminds you that when my hand is on yours, I assure you that the dragon is dead and your new creation and your new life is assured. Now, if you want to unpack that parable a little bit further, when you get home, you take your note sheet that you have, that you take notes on, that's inside of your worship folder, and you flip it over, and there's some passages of scripture that's going to help you unpack the parable I just gave to you. See what I did there? Getting you to study the word by yourself. Let me give you the last thing here after he talks about the crucifixion of the flesh. Verse number 25, he says this: since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Listen to me in the last few moments here, if you would. Paul uses a military terminology here. He says, what I want you to do is I want you to fall into marching order. I want you to keep in step with the Spirit. That's what he's saying. Spirit's headed somewhere. I want you to stay in step with him. I want you to live by the Spirit. The law's off to the side. You don't have to worry about it because you're not under the law anymore. The law's under you. It's your sure footing as you walk by the Spirit of God. It stands to the side and it applauds. This is everything that I was hoping that would ultimately occur because the law is good and was given by God. And now the law looks on and says, man, this is what it was meant to be. This is what it was all about. It was about faith in Jesus. And now the Spirit of God comes to live inside of us. And now we can walk like Jesus by the power of God so that we can show a world what that looks like. We don't have to just manage our sin now. We can walk by the power of the Spirit and overcome sin. We're free. We're not only free from sin, we're free not to sin. This is what it means to be free, Paul is trying to say to us. And he says, walk in the Spirit. Why? Because this is the life you're destined for. We are now living out small tastes and small glimpses of the life that we are destined for when the kingdom is finally made whole, when the kingdom comes in its completion upon the return of the Savior, Jesus Christ. We are going to be living in a one law world, the law of Christ, the law of love. We won't be bound by any of these other things because we will be bound by the glory of God and bound by living like Jesus. This is what Paul says in the book of Galatians. If you want to live free, this is what it looks like. Stop trying to manage your sin and start understanding what it means to walk in the Spirit. Let's bow our heads. If you don't have to move, I've asked you not to out of respect for the people around you. We're gone in just a minute. I would say this to you. If you're here and you've never before turned from your sin, put your faith in Jesus, I need you to know something. The Spirit of God doesn't live in you. And all of these things that I'm talking about, they're not relevant for you because maybe you're still in a place where you're trying to earn God's favor or keep enough rules so that your good outweighs your bad. That's a way that leads to slavery. It's a way that leads to death. The product of that, you'll be a captive. If that's you and you want to turn from that and you want to put your faith in Jesus and realize that He alone is who can save you. He alone is who can change you. He alone is who can deposit His Spirit within you so that you can live free from sin and you're free not to sin. It doesn't mean you'll never make a mistake. It's not what we're talking about. It's not perfectionism, but it's new life. It's new creation. It's new disposition. It's new want-tos. If you've never before come to that place, and when we dismiss in just a moment, if you're here in this room or if you're in the East Worship Center, just come by the fireside room. It's straight across the atrium. It's clearly marked. And speak to one of the pastors, prayer partners there, and just say, you know what, I need to put my faith in Jesus. That's where we need to begin. But if you're here and you do know Jesus, you know that you've been transformed by Him. You know full well the power of the flesh and how it wars against the Spirit. What I'm asking you to do is to spend time practicing the presence of Jesus. Because when you practice His presence will change your practice. Live in the Spirit. The life of Jesus flowing through you by the power of God. Father, your word is far too rich for me to be able to wrap my arms around and my mind around, but I pray that wherever I got it right, you, by the power of your Spirit, would wash that over the people of God. Wherever, God, I might have muddled or gotten confused, I pray that by the grace of your Spirit, you would overwhelm my frailty and my words with your voice into the hearts of your people. I'm trusting you to do that. And I thank you for your grace. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you, folks. Have a great week.